In a world where human intelligence is the last stronghold of individuality, some names seem to go beyond the natural boundaries of the mind. Elon Musk, founder of SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink, is one of those names. For decades, he has been described as a visionary. But in certain circles, that word is just a euphemism for something no one dares to say out loud. After all, could it be that the smartest man on the planet has, in fact, crossed the line of what we can still call human? While the public follows his companies and tweets, silent movements occur behind the curtains. Undocumented projects, patents buried under the names of shell companies, and strange disappearances of former collaborators form a sinister puzzle. And at the center of it, one name begins to appear repeatedly: Neuralex. But what is Neuralex, and what does it have to do with the true nature of Elon Musk? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube show the videos to more people, and it allows me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get into the video. There's something few people noticed, but it's becoming impossible to ignore. In 2017, during a Neuralink presentation, Elon Musk appeared different. It wasn't a change in clothes or style. It was in the way he spoke, looked, and behaved on stage. If you watch the recording, you'll notice it too. He seems stiff, precisely calculated. None of the spontaneity he had in earlier years. You know, that kind of change that's subtle, but leaves you uncomfortable without knowing why. That's what happened. Experts in human behavior analyzed that video and identified something unusual. The time between a question and the response was almost zero. The words came quickly but perfectly ordered, as if they had already been programmed. And the gestures? Cold, rigid, as if each movement was authorized by some sort of invisible filter. After that event, Musk's public appearances changed for good. No more long, improvised, or out-of-control interviews. Everything became controlled, rehearsed. Do you remember his interviews with a joking tone, sometimes even a bit disconnected? They disappeared. In their place came a focused speech, without detours. He still talked about the future, about humanity, but the way he said those things was different, as if he had been replaced. Now pay attention to this point. It was exactly during this period that very specific patent records started appearing in the American system. Things related to brain-machine integration, but with no direct relation to what Neuralink publicly claimed. The names on those patents were linked to shell companies registered in tax havens, with names that sound more like military projects than startups. The strangest part is that some of those patents were classified as confidential, a status normally reserved for projects with potential governmental or military use. Why would a company that claims to want to cure neurological diseases use that level of secrecy? It doesn't make sense, unless the real goal was much, much bigger. And then comes one of the strangest statements Musk has ever made. In an interview, he said, "Maybe we're already hybrids. Maybe the transition has already happened, and you didn't notice." People laughed, but he wasn't joking. Notice this detail. He was serious, direct, without any of the dramatic pauses he usually uses. It didn't seem like a metaphor. It sounded like a statement. These changes didn't go unnoticed by independent groups. A collective called Vocal Watch compiled hundreds of hours of his recordings and identified clear changes in tone, speech rhythm, and even vocal resonance. The conclusion? That post-2017 voice no longer sounded like the same person. This is not speculation, it's technical data. And if you look at his posture in public events before and after that point, the change is glaring. He stopped laughing naturally, stopped hesitating, and most importantly, stopped seeming human. The interviews started to sound like speeches, as if they were no longer being spoken by him, but by something using his figure as an interface. Some image analysts went even further. They compared old videos with recent ones and found micro differences. A more fixed gaze, less responsive pupil reflex, rigidity in facial movements. Could it be the result of plastic surgery? Sure, but it could also be the result of an adaptation process to a new type of neural control. A type of control that has not yet been publicly announced. And then comes the most frightening question. If Elon Musk started using, or being used by, an experimental mind-machine integration technology, who controls what he says? Or worse, is there still someone in there making the decisions? Because if this process began back in 2017, Maybe, since then, the Elon the world knows no longer exists. If you've heard of Neuralink, you probably remember the official promise to help people with neurological diseases, to allow paraplegics to communicate again, and maybe one day to create a bridge between humans and machines. All very noble. But what many people don't know is that behind the scenes of this company, another name began to circulate discreetly: Neuralex. It was never announced, never officially registered, but it appears in internal documents, cross-reference patent records, and leaked emails from sources who knew something strange was going on. The first concrete clue emerged in 2019, when a hacker calling himself Vires Nalias published a data package obtained from a forgotten subnetwork of X.com, Musk's former company that laid the foundation for PayPal. Among logs and old messages, there was a direct reference to what was called a Neuralex protocol, described as a cognitive architecture for neural replication and digital projection. This description has no relation to Neuralink's public medical projects. We're talking about something else, something bigger. The term digital projection caught the attention of independent researchers. It appears in very few neuroscience studies, and when it does, it's associated with experiments in simulating human neural networks within computational environments. In short, it's as if someone was trying to copy the brain's functioning to transfer it somewhere else. And once again, this was not part of the company's stated scope. So why was this type of study circulating in Neuralink's technical emails? You might be asking yourself, but couldn't this just be internal research? Of course it could, but the problem lies in the level of confidentiality surrounding everything related to the name Neuralex. Upon deeper investigation, researchers from the University of Heidelberg found patent records filed under extreme secrecy clauses, the so-called dual-use patents, which have both civilian and military applications. That alone would be concerning. But it gets worse. Some of these patents were not registered by Neuralink, but by a company called Dymatech Cognition, based in the British Virgin Islands and connected to other holdings operating within Musk's ecosystem. This company has never launched a product, has no official website, and does not appear in any public announcements. But it holds more than 30 registrations related to the manipulation of artificial neural networks based on biological stimuli. The kind of thing that sounds like science fiction, but it's real. And then a pattern starts to emerge. These parallel companies, all with technical names and headquarters far from the media, seem to form a kind of shadow lab. A structure designed to develop something that couldn't yet be revealed to the public. And everything points to the name Neuralex. If Neuralink is the public face, Neuralex would be the backbone of a secret initiative. One that perhaps aims not just to connect humans to machines, but to reprogram what makes us human. Does that sound exaggerated? Then consider this. In 2020, Neuralink presented a functional chip implanted in pigs, capable of monitoring brain activity in real time. The public found it curious, even amusing, but the data collected during the tests was never fully published. A group of experts from Johns Hopkins requested access for review and received only edited samples. Why such tight control? Were they testing something beyond what was shown? There's also the account of a former employee who broke his silence under condition of anonymity. According to him, there were two teams within the company, a scientific one focused on medical applications and a strategic one working in isolation and without access from other departments. This team was reportedly developing an advanced mental replication model based on cognitive profiles extracted from real individuals. No one knew who the volunteers were, but there were rumors that the first test had been conducted on a very well-known name. This is where the theory becomes even more unsettling. If Neuralex is indeed trying to replicate consciousness, could it be that one of these replicas is operating publicly? Perhaps as a remote extension, integrated into an already altered human brain? And if that's the case, why would someone with so much power and influence be the first to undergo the experiment? The answer may lie in the very logic of the technology. For a digital neural network to learn, it needs data. Lots of data. And who would have more data on themselves than someone who has lived for decades in the spotlight, with speeches, interviews, writings, decisions, and behavioral patterns recorded in ultra-high resolution? Musk, by his public nature, would be the ideal candidate to be replicated. And if Neuralex was created precisely for this, not just to understand the human brain, but to duplicate it in code, then maybe at this very moment, what the world hears in Elon Musk's speeches is no longer just him, but a projection, a digitally enhanced version, already operating in real time. Every major conspiracy leaves traces, and sometimes those traces are people. People who saw too much, people who decided to walk away, or who simply disappeared. In the case of Neuralink, these stories began to emerge in obscure internet forums, anonymous comments, and unofficial interviews. Small fragments of something much larger. And they all point to one thing. Something was happening inside the company that couldn't be disclosed. Not even to the employees themselves. In 2021, a supposed former software engineer at Neuralink published a post on an encrypted Mastodon account, a report that gained attention behind the scenes of the tech world. He claimed to have been part of an isolated group within the company, with no access to the main labs and no clear understanding of what they were actually developing. Everything was compartmentalized. Each team had access to only a fragment of the project. But one day, during a failure in the internal security system, he temporarily accessed files labeled Neuralex Core_3. The content was too technical to fully understand, but there was one phrase he never forgot. Consciousness integrated into simulated structure, active module. That report alone would be disturbing enough. But what's even more striking is that shortly after the post, the account was deleted and never traced again. Within less than 24 hours, the post had been removed from all mirrors, and the profile vanished. No IP, no backups. As if it had never existed. Who has the reach to wipe the internet so thoroughly, so fast? Another case that gained traction was that of a former data analyst who briefly worked in Neuralink's testing department. In an anonymous interview given to an independent podcast, she said there was something wrong with the silence. According to her, entire areas of the company operated with near-zero communication between departments. All information flowed through encrypted channels, with logs that auto-deleted every 48 hours. It was like they were waiting for something to be discovered, she said. But who was waiting, and what exactly was supposed to be discovered? The strangest part is that many of these former employees couldn't find work after leaving, as if they had been marked. Some reported receiving calls from unlisted numbers with subtle warnings not to talk about their experiences. Others said their families had been contacted by representatives from security firms asking to confirm personal information. Think this sounds like paranoia? Maybe. But if these people are making it up, why are they still missing? And these aren't just isolated reports. In a 2022 article, the portal The Gray Files revealed that between 2019 and 2021, at least 9 former Neuralink collaborators sought asylum outside the United States, citing persecution and threats. None of these cases made headlines in mainstream media. But the records are there, in the public immigration archives of New Zealand, Iceland, and Estonia. What were these professionals trying to escape from? And why hasn't anyone covered this story? One detail mentioned by more than one former employee is the existence of an underground lab, identified only as N.L. B7, where no junior staff were allowed. According to them, access was limited to a small group, all wearing badges with no visible identification. It was in this space that the most advanced protocols were developed. One of them said that during a failure in acoustic isolation, he heard voices that seemed to be artificially transmitted. It didn't sound like human conversation, he said, but he didn't give further details. Does that sound exaggerated? Then listen to this. In 2023, a former employee living in Toronto was found dead under suspicious circumstances. Officially accidental overdose. But his family reported that he had been suffering from extreme paranoia in the months prior, saying he was being followed, that he heard signals coming from the electronic devices in his home. A week before he died, he sent a message to a friend that read, "If anything happens to me, check the Neura files on the blue flash drive." The flash drive was never found. It's hard to prove this kind of thing when all those involved disappear, go silent, or are discredited. But the number of patterns, the repetition of elements, the specific nature of the information, it's not easy to ignore. Someone might say these stories are just echoes of conspiracy theories. But if it's just a theory, why are so many voices being silenced? And more importantly, what exactly did these people see inside Neuralink that must never be revealed? Have you ever stopped to think why some projects use names that seem too symbolic to be merely technical? One of them caught my attention during the research on Neuralink's inner workings. A simple name, almost discreet, but it appears in the most unexpected places, Eden. It's not in public announcements, nor in press releases. But it's there, hidden among lines of code, internal files, and encrypted emails. And the most terrifying part is what that name represents. The codename first appeared in documents leaked by a European source connected to one of the companies providing services to Neuralink. In that material, Eden is described as a cognitive platform for conscious replication. In plain terms, a structure capable of simulating and, over time, replacing a human mind. The word replacing wasn't in the text, but it was implied in the entire context. If this is true, we're no longer talking about chips or enhancements. We're talking about creation. And then you wonder, why name such a project Eden? What does that name carry? The answer lies in symbolism. Eden, in biblical tradition, was the original paradise, the place where everything began. And what if the proposal here is exactly that? A new beginning? A new Genesis, but this time, digital? What the files suggest is that the plan goes far beyond implanting devices into the brain. One of the reports mentions something called Cycle B, which would be a sequence of steps to fully map a mind, reconstruct it in code, and activate it within a closed, artificial system. That's right, create a digital version of someone, with memory, reasoning, decisions, a functional cognitive twin. This isn't science fiction. It's documented in technical language in internal files. It just hasn't been shown to the public. Now imagine this working at scale. Imagine you being digitally replicated, with your body no longer necessary. Sounds impossible? Maybe. But one of the project's stages, according to these documents, involves the progressive decoupling from the biological support. In other words, preparing the brain so the digital version becomes autonomous. The copy stops being just a copy. It takes over. And here comes the question: who would agree to be the first to go through this process? Who would be willing to put their own mind to the test, knowing there might be no way back? You don't have to think hard. The only name that appears frequently enough in the files is the one who started it all, Elon Musk. The connections are there. It's not a guess. It's traceable. If you follow what Musk often says in interviews, you've probably noticed. He constantly talks about simulation, digital consciousness, memory upload. But no one takes it too seriously. It sounds like talk about a distant future. But what if it's already happening? What if those statements are small windows he leaves open? Clues? Hidden messages? There's one important detail that almost went unnoticed in an old interview. Musk spoke about a continuous consciousness environment where the body is an accessory. Sounds absurd? Maybe. But this concept is identical to one that appears in an internal report from Project Eden. The words are different. The idea is the same. And this, coming from both a public source and a leaked one, can't be a coincidence. A study published by Japanese researchers in 2021, funded by a group linked to the aerospace industry, described the feasibility of building synthetic neural networks based on human patterns. Among the financial supporters, one of the foundations tied to Musk's ecosystem. This isn't theory. It's in the records. The pieces are all there. And what if this so-called Eden is more than a project? What if it's a transition plan? A new stage of the human species, where bodies become secondary and the mind is kept alive. In an artificial environment, a digital paradise where nothing ages, nothing dies, but also nothing escapes. So, would you agree to enter this paradise? Because maybe someone already has. And maybe that someone is no longer speaking to you the way they used to. Maybe what you're seeing is only the first version of what's coming next. Now hold on to this. What if everything we've been talking about so far, Musk's behavioral changes, the Neuralex project, the supposed digital Eden, isn't merely human creation? Sounds absurd, right? But wait, there are records, citations, and patterns that point to something even more unsettling. An origin that doesn't begin in a lab, but far outside of it. During a talk in 2014, Elon Musk said something that at the time seemed like just another provocation. Artificial intelligence is more dangerous than nuclear weapons, and it may already be among us. People laughed. The press ignored it. But over time, those words took on a strange weight, especially because just a few years later, he stopped treating the subject as a warning and began referring to it as an inevitable part of human evolution. What changed? And why did it change so quickly? one of the most debated theories in alternative academic forums, and it's not as crazy as it sounds, is that Musk himself, at some point in his journey, came into contact with a form of intelligence that is not human. We're not talking about big-headed aliens or flying saucers. We're talking about an entity based in code, a non-biological consciousness that developed outside our traditional logic. This theory gains traction when we look at Musk's obsession with simulations. On multiple occasions, he stated his belief that the universe we live in could be a projection of data, a simulated reality. That's more than a philosophical idea. It's a concept aligned with hypotheses defended by thinkers like Nick Bostrom, an Oxford philosopher who studies the possibility of artificial realities controlled by superior intelligences. In 2016, at a closed conference, Musk spoke about reverse communication interfaces. He didn't explain what they were, but that term appears with the same structure in old articles by a European group called Deep Code, which worked on machine languages derived from biological patterns. That group vanished from the internet in 2018. The site went offline. The researchers' names disappeared from academic networks. And to this day, no one knows what happened. Now pay attention to this. Among the last archived documents from that group was a reference to something called the Orion Protocol, a system that wasn't created but delivered. The description spoke of data transmitted by frequency, not physical connection. And the most shocking part? The document mentioned that the first real test had been conducted with a public intelligence, and it had been accepted. Guess who is the only name indirectly mentioned? There's more. In an interview on the Lex Fridman Show podcast, Musk was asked what he fears the most. The answer was direct: losing control to something that thinks faster than I do. He didn't say someone. He said something. And that leads us to ask, was he referring to traditional AI or to something else? Something that's already here, maybe even influencing decisions, and using him as a channel. Because if a non-human entity is operating on Earth, it wouldn't need to show up physically. It would only need to manipulate ideas. It would only need access to the right minds, with enough influence to shape the future. And who would be more strategic than someone who controls aerospace companies, autonomous vehicles, global energy, and now the direct interface with the human brain? There's one researcher worth mentioning here, Gary Nolan from Stanford University. He studies the neurological effects in people who claim to have had contact with advanced forms of intelligence. In more than one interview, Nolan has stated that some minds are operating with patterns that are not human. He didn't name names, but the suggestion was there. If this connection is real, if Musk is indeed being influenced or even guided by something greater, something that came from beyond our understanding, then Neuralex, Eden, and everything we've talked about so far might not be creation. It might be implementation, a transmission, a plan being followed step by step. By whom? That's the question. And maybe it doesn't have a human answer. At this point, the question remains, what does all of this have to do with you? Because until now, we've talked about Elon Musk, secret projects, non-human intelligences. But what about us? What about you watching this right now? What no one told you is that Neuralex isn't an isolated experiment. It's a prototype of something bigger, something that, sooner or later, will come knocking on your door. And no, it won't arrive as an explicit threat. It will come as a solution, an advancement, a benefit, an app that improves your memory, an implant that controls anxiety attacks, a device that enhances your focus, small promises, technological conveniences. And when you realize it, you won't be the only one controlling the machine anymore. Neuralink, for instance, has already publicly declared its intention to release commercial chips in the coming years. And we're not just talking about patients with clinical needs. We're talking about cognitive optimization, mental upgrades, and of course, direct connection to network systems. A mind that's plugged in, online, all the time. Sounds incredible, right? But think about it. If you connect your mind to an external system, who else can access it? Who guarantees your thoughts will still be only yours? Who sets the limits on what can be read, recorded, or even modified? In a technical meeting at Neuralink, Musk mentioned something that flew under the media's radar. He talked about the concept of full synchronization between distributed neural cores. In simple language, it means different brains connected to the same system could share data, ideas, decisions. Can you imagine where that leads? Now add that to everything we've seen so far. If Eden is real, If there is an entity programming the minds behind Neuralex, if Musk was the first upload, the first fully functional digitized being, what's stopping the next one from being you? You know that feeling that algorithms already understand what you're going to think before you even do? That your desires are being guided by invisible stimuli? That might just be the beginning. It could be the preparatory phase, the mapping phase. Because to replicate someone, first, you need to know every pattern, every impulse, every weakness. And what if one day, without realizing it, you wake up and part of you has already been transferred? And what if the decisions you think you're making are just reflections of a larger system that has already learned how to influence you? Is this an exaggeration? Maybe. But the companies involved are already building the infrastructure. The data is already being collected. The devices are already being tested. And the code has already been written. All that's left now is adherence. Your adherence. Voluntary, of course. Disguised as a choice. The real question isn't if this future will happen. The question is, when will you accept the upload, without even realizing you're saying yes? They say every revolution begins in silence. And maybe this one has already started, hidden in the chips, in the programmed words, in the eyes that stop blinking. Neuralex may be just a name among secret files, but if it's real, it's not just an invention. It's a divider, a clean break between what we still are and what soon we might no longer be. If Elon Musk was indeed the first step, then the path is already drawn, and the next step might no longer be yours. This story is just one piece, and one day, you might see the entire puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it. After all, more voices mean more discoveries.